Thank you all for having me at the 28th Annual Great Game of Business Conference. I'd like to talk a little bit today about conscious capitalism, a topic that's near and dear to my heart and what's become my life's work. I came to conscious capitalism almost accidentally. I was fortunate enough to be a CEO early in my career. I started a company when I was young. And, as a company grows, I hired all these outside people. And trying to be a good CEO, I'm listening to my advisors and listening to these people with more experience than I had. And often I found that their perspective on the world was very different than mine about what the right choice was or how to deal with a customer issue or what have you. And it never quite felt right to me. And over time, what I experienced was those decisions that were consistent with trying to be more conscious and consistent with simply caring about the people around me with a longer term lens, those worked better than the corporate raider mentality of, do only the minimum and pay what you can get away with and all of those mindsets. And so I think I got here, we call it now the unconscious conscious capitalist. One of the neat things about the business we're in now is that we find conscious capitalists all around the country. They may not use the words, but when you hear the stories about what's important to them, we find them everywhere. And so I found this group of people and this idea because I wandered my way into what both felt right for me as a leader and what did I find work in my business. And the conscious capitalism movement brought language and community to this idea. So Satori Capital started with what at the time was a bit of a nutty idea. Being entrepreneurs, my co-founder Randy Eisenman and I had this experience where we were out in the capital markets working with investors, and what those investors believed and how they went about their day just didn't fit with us. Our understanding of how business worked, and particularly over the long term, was in conflict with what we saw investment firms wanting. And so like entrepreneurs, we said, well, we can complain about it or we can go fix it. So in 2008, in the middle of the financial crisis, we said there must be a better way. And we think a long-term perspective will change everything. And we went out to raise capital to do it. As you might imagine, the timing was poor and it's life's work and we're patient. And it's the most important thing we can do to begin to bring this perspective to the investment community. So we invest in our private equity business. We invest in companies that are 5 to 25 million of EBITDA, call it 75 to maybe 250 employees, and try to actually be a long-term partner with these companies over time. So you've got two layers of what we're trying to do. One, we're trying to get great results for all of our stakeholders, like every business, both our investors and our portfolio teams and so forth. But here's the other thing we're trying to do. We're trying to carve a path through the jungle. If Satori can take a stand and say these things are important and we think these things will drive better results, not just for investors, but for everyone involved, then that makes it a little bit easier for the next company and a little bit easier for the next investor to say, hey, maybe we should care about culture. Maybe we should care about transparency. Maybe we should care about customers. And so if we can make it a little bit easier for the next firm, and they go, and then the next firm and the next firm, someday the things that make us different, the things that create our competitive advantage will no longer be different. Someday every investor will care about these things. And that's when our work will be done. When our competitive advantage no longer matters because every investor cares about these things, we will both be no different than anyone else. And that's actually what we're trying to do. That is how we'll change the world. The big idea around conscious capitalism is actually pretty simple. What if profits are not a reflection of what we can take, but they're actually a reflection of how much value we created? If our employees and our customers and our other stakeholders are all happy and fulfilled, we think the investor stakeholder, the financial stakeholder, will also get what they need. And so our view is that this is not actually about a new form of capitalism. Conscious capitalism is what capitalism has always been in its truest form. Whether you use the words or don't use the words, making happy customers and happy employees does actually benefit other stakeholders. Unfortunately, I think we actually have two types of capitalism now. The capitalism that we hear about on the news every day, and that's mostly giant companies with disconnected shareholders. And so a question on my mind is that what we are doing every day? Think about the company that you lead or the company that you work for, and is it similar to or very different than what you see these giant businesses doing? And our experience so far is it's actually a very different thing. The original idea behind capitalism and the thing that most of us do every day just isn't on the news. We don't hear about all of the great things that we do every day. We don't hear about our peer that got promoted into their dream job. We don't hear about somebody that gets to work in a way that is consistent with their own personal values. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the framing we have that's negative around capitalism is from a thing that's very different than what we practice day in and day out. And I think the more we can tell this story through the lens of entrepreneurship, it will help us. Both entrepreneurship in its pure form of starting new companies, and those of us that are entrepreneurs inside the company that are trying to make it a better place. How is it that as a society we can both love entrepreneurs at the same time and also dislike capitalism? Those two things are deeply intertwined. And so I'll ask you to just notice around you that there are often two types. The shareholder capitalism that we hear about on the news and the conscious capitalism that most of us practice day in and day out. We believe business is the most powerful force for change in the world. Businesses that get extraordinary outcomes for all these stakeholders do a really important thing in the world. They lift people out of poverty, they create prosperity, and they actually elevate all of our existence. Business is not just about money. Business is not an ATM. Business is a vehicle for expressing hopes and dreams, not just of the owners, but of everyone who's involved. I think step number one in changing the narrative is to just live it first. Like, what better thing could we have than an example where employees love to work there and customers love to work with the company and suppliers love it and so forth. And that, I think, is really a bit of life's work for me to say, what if the whole world were filled with companies that behave this way, companies that were transparent, that cared about everyone, that tried to do the right thing all the time? Well, many of us have jobs, and so the ability to go and spend our day inside these companies, like, that's the most important change, is how are we spending our actual days and our time? And I believe that every industry that has a company that stands out in this way, the competitors see it and hear about it, and the employees at competitors see it and hear about it, and so do the customers. And so by simply taking a stand for what you care about and living that every day, you'll move your industry just a little bit, and you'll move your team just a little bit. And if we collectively all pull on that same rope and say, hey, there's a better way, we can do better, we can get an extraordinary outcome in a business, that's setting the example is the most important thing we can do. So let's talk a little bit about how conscious capitalism affects the shareholder stakeholder. Like, said another way, can we get good business results from this, or is it just an add-on? We see lots of conversation now about things like ESG and corporate social responsibility and so forth. I'm gonna be really clear. That is not what conscious capitalism is about. The idea here is, if you can pay attention to these stakeholders, the things like don't throw trash in the river become obvious. And here's why they're obvious. If you do a couple of things, one, you care about all of your stakeholders, and two, you draw your time horizon out a little bit, right? Instead of this quarter's results, what if we thought about this year's results? And what are the implications of this decision, not next week, but 5 years from now? And so our experience has been, and the data is very consistent with this, companies that use conscious capitalism as a frame both take more perspectives into their decision making, and they make longer term decisions. And I will tell you that consistently, time after time, companies that can make longer term decisions win. They get better financial results than their peers. They're not cutting corners. In fact, let me give you an example. I want you to think about the house that you buy to raise your family in. And you're going to do a little work on the house. what's the standard there for the quality of work you want to do on that house or that you want done on that house? I want you to think about a different situation. You're going to buy a condo in phase one because you hope you can flip it to somebody else, but you're going to do a little bit of work to it. Many people will do different work on the condo they're going to sell in a year than the house they're going to live in. And so if you treat the business like it's the house you're going to raise your kids in, over time that value compounds. And all you have to do is look out just a little bit further, and the business results are extraordinary. And we see this in industry after industry. And to be clear, we believe it so much, it's what we built our firm around. Our fundamental investment thesis is we will do better for our investors by backing and working with companies who take a longer term perspective to things. And so our expectation is not to be able to get good results in spite of these things, but because of them. I think this idea about closing the gap between the haves and have-nots is an important one. And I appreciate the idea of teaching everyone how that plays out and what skills and tools you might have to have more prosperity. And again, if we go back to this idea that prosperity is infinite, and that it's not win-lose and take from one and give to the other, but if we all have the tools and knowledge and skills, then we all have the ability to create more prosperity. I think this mindset will absolutely not just close the gap, but simply create more prosperity. You think about the last 200 years. For all of human history, something like 90% of humans lived on less than $1 a day in today's money. Like most of the world was dirt poor. 200 years of capitalism, that's completely inverted. Less than 15% of the world population lives on less than $1 a day. So all of human history was the same way, and then came capitalism and prosperity, and now the vast majority of us in the world have had our situation dramatically improved. I think there are a few reasons why more of us aren't doing some flavor of conscious capitalism. But I'll start with, I actually think there's more of us than is covered in the news. We have an awesome business with happy employees and joyful customers and so forth. Like that just doesn't tend to make the media. And so my first challenge is, let's look around and recognize each other when we see this behavior in our own business, when we see this behavior in a supplier. Are we telling them? Are we calling it out? Are we noticing this extraordinary relationship? Are we seeing someone do the right thing by a customer and behave in a conscious way? And so on one hand, I want more of the world to run this way. And on the other hand, also we should recognize the wonderful things that we all do every day, that the good news and the bad news is it just seems normal to us. The questions like, how else would you run your business come to mind? And so let's start with recognizing and calling out this behavior when we see it in our own business and when we see it in businesses around us. I think the second thing that holds it back a little bit for those who aren't yet there is the question of where would one have learned how to take a broader view and a longer term view, right? If you grew up in a big company where the only thing that mattered was, did we make this quarter's numbers? How and where did you learn to say, we're going to take a longer term view? And so this goes back to telling our story about what worked, what helped make our companies successful, why they work, and making it a little bit easier for the next person to stop for just a moment and say, I'm going to try this different way. I'm going to try this different way just on this one thing and see if I can get it to work and see how it works. And the last thing I'll add is, while I think the corporate social responsibility and their flavors of programs are very well intentioned, I think the danger there is you can build a program around solving an issue like that as an add-on to the business. And so it's this extra thing we do, it's not inherent to the business. We shouldn't need to turn these into programs. We should make these core to the strategy of our business. And so I think in some cases, the CSR and things like that actually don't help because they give a company enough talking points to say, look, we're doing good things, to not actually think about how could my strategy reflect being more closely aligned with my customers and being a better partner to my suppliers and being a better place to work. And so it's hard, right? When we work on things like strategy and for fundamental assumptions about a company, it's hard. But again, back to the beginning, we can start by living it every day, and we can start by being willing to recognize the stories and the actions in our own companies and the companies that are around us. Let's go tell each other's story about how great business really can be.